Captain Adrian Cole stepped off the cargo shuttle and felt a wave of relief mixed with fatigue. He had spent weeks hopping between supply runs on the Outer Rim, and Area 9 station was his last stop before a long journey home. The station hung. In quiet darkness, its corridors dim and dusty. The hum of distant machinery echoed through empty halls. Adrian ran a hand over his uniform and glanced at the flickering panel by the airlock. Only one sleeping pod remained available, the station. Manager had warned. Adrian frowned. He remembered the cramped quarters of previous posts, but never had he faced the idea of sharing the single pod with another crew member. Yet resources were scarce across the frontier, and arming each visitor with a private pod was no longer possible. He squared his shoulders and tapped the panel to confirm his assignment. The screen displayed his name and the pod number, 47. The only other name listed was Sarah Evans, Lieutenant and Communications Officer. Sarah stood a short distance away, arms folded against her chest. She wore the standard station jumpsuit, patched and faded by time. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her eyes held a sharp intelligence. She offered Adrian a small nod as she approached. She did not smile, but her gaze was steady. "You saw the board?" she said quietly. "We share the pod." Adrian swallowed. Normally, station life adhered strictly to protocols, and personal distance was part of the code. Yet Sarah's tone carried an unspoken determination. He hesitated. It felt like a breach of comfort, but he knew she was right. There was no other option. "All right," he replied. "Lead the way." They walked through the narrow corridor, their boots clicking on the metal grating. Behind a sliding door, Pod 47 glowed with soft blue lights. The space was barely larger than a small storage locker. Two thin mats lined the floor, and a single console sat against the far wall. Emergency life support blinked green. Sarah opened the console hatch and tapped a sequence on its illuminated screen. With a hiss, the pod sealed them inside. Adrian closed his eyes briefly as the hatch slid shut. He heard Sarah's breath steady beside him. The mats were thin, meant to conserve space and power. Adrian and Sarah each took one, folding their packs and uniforms neatly at the foot. Then they shifted closer to share the central life support unit. Skin barely touched, they sat in silence as the pod system cycled through startup checks. "We have 3 hours before the next supply ship arrives," Sarah said softly. "I want to use this time well," Adrian nodded. He could feel the warmth of her shoulder near his arm. The pod's walls were insulated, but the close proximity made each sound louder. His heart beat faster, not from fear but from surprise. At how alive he felt in such a small space, he cleared his throat. "What do you usually do when you have downtime?" Sarah shrugged. "I read logs, checked messages, contact Earth. Sometimes I just rest. This station can be lonely." Adrian thought of his own family on Earth, sleeping in spacious beds he once took for granted. He pictured his daughter's soft laugh and remembered the feel of his home's gravity. Here, all that seemed distant and thin. Sharing this pod made him imagine a shared life rather than a solitary voyage. Outside, the station shuddered as a maintenance drone passed by. The pod trembled slightly and Adrian gripped the edge of his mat. Sarah reached out and placed her hand on his wrist. Her touch was confident, kind. He relaxed. "We'll be safe," she said. "No storms or raids come this far?" Adrian offered. A small smile. "I'm glad you're here." They sat and talked as the minutes passed. Sarah described her first posting on Area 9, how she learned to trust the old station's creaks as part of its character. Adrian recounted a near collision with an asteroid freight transport and how he managed to steer clear with a last-second boost. Their voices softened in the confined space, each story building a bridge between them as time went on. Adrian noticed how Sarah's presence eased his worries. The pod's hum faded into the background as he focused on her words. She spoke of her hopes for new trade routes and her dream of seeing distant nebulae. Adrian shared his longing to return to Earth and build a small farm on his home planet. The light above them dimmed to a gentle glow, indicating the pod's standby mode. Outside, the distant stars shimmered beyond the small viewport. Adrian reached out, his fingers brushing Sarah's hand. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Thank you," he whispered. "For making this easier?" Sarah nodded, her braids swaying. "We fit," she said, smile in her voice dot in the stillness of the pod. Adrian felt a new kind of comfort. He realized that sometimes sharing space brought more than warmth. It built trust, friendship, and understanding. As his eyes grew heavy, he closed them, still aware of Sarah's steady presence beside him. Outside Area 9 station, the void remained vast and silent. Inside the single sleeping pod, two souls found common ground. And as the stars wheeled overhead, Adrian and Sarah drifted into rest, bound by circumstance and choice, skin to skin and heart to heart. Adrian stirred as the pod's lights brightened. He blinked against the soft glow and felt the weight of the small space lift from his shoulders. Sarah lay beside him, eyes closed and breathing steady. He watched her for a moment, grateful for her calm presence. When she opened her eyes, she offered him a gentle nod. They unsealed the pod and stood in the narrow corridor. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone. Outside, engineers in patched uniforms hurried past, carrying tools and spare parts. The station hummed with activity as life support teams worked on repairs. Adrian and Sarah exchanged a look. The day ahead would not be routine. A klaxon echoed down the hall. Red lights flashed. Adrian grasped Sarah's arm. "System alert," he said. "Power surge in Sector 3. They hurried toward the control room. Sparks danced over exposed wiring in the corridor. A maintenance drone drifted by, its lights flickering. Sarah pulled out her wrist console and tapped commands. Data scrolled across the small screen. Adrian scanned the environment, noting loose panels and flickering pipes. When they reached the control room, panels lit up like constellations. The main grid was unstable. The console showed life support dropping in the eastern wing. Engineers argued over access codes. Sarah stepped forward and spoke quietly but firmly. Her calm voice cut through the tension. "Let me coordinate with Central. Adrian and I will patch the local circuit." The lead engineer hesitated, then nodded. Sarah took a portable terminal and set it on a workbench. Adrian joined her, tapping through schematics. The terminal displayed a tangle of circuits and power nodes. Sarah pointed to a failing junction. Adrian traced the lines with his finger. "We need to reroute power from the west corridor," he said. "But that line is under heavy load." Sarah frowned. "We can use the auxiliary line through the storage bay. It's slower, but it can carry enough to keep life support going." Adrian agreed. "Let's do it." They grabbed cables and headed down a side passage. The storage bay was cluttered with crates and spare parts. The flicker of emergency lights cast long shadows. Adrian and Sarah worked side by side, unfastening panels and moving equipment. Their hands brushed over wires and connectors. The space was tight, but each felt a steady confidence in the other's skill. Outside the bay, a sudden tremor shook the station. Metal groaned. A loose crate toppled. Dust and debris rained down. Sarah steadied Adrian's shoulder. He set the cable aside and checked the console. "Power line holding," he said. "We need to secure the junction now." Sarah found a spare clamp and tightened it around the cable. Adrian hooked the connector in. To place, sparks flew and the emergency lights winked out. For a moment, the bay was dark. Then the hum returned as power flowed through the auxiliary line. A green indicator blinked on the terminal. Life support in the eastern wing stabilized. They exhaled in unison. Adrian wiped sweat from his brow. Sarah brushed a strand of hair from her face. Each saw relief in the other's eyes. Walking back toward the control room, Adrian felt the station's rhythm change. The klaxon had stopped. Engineers cheered softly. Sarah tapped the terminal and confirmed the grid was secure. "Good work," the lead engineer said. He offered Adrian a nod. Then he turned to Sarah. "And you, thank you." Adrian and Sarah exchanged a smile. They stood together in the control room as panels returned to their normal glow. The station felt alive again. Later, they found a quiet corner overlooking the docking bay. Through the viewport, starships glinted against the black. Sarah leaned On the railing, Adrian stood close. The emergency had passed, but they both knew the frontier held other dangers. "You were brave," Sarah said softly. "You kept calm even when the walls shook." Adrian shook his head. "You were the one who kept me focused." "I might have frozen without you," Sarah smiled. "We make a good team." He looked at her and felt a warmth beyond the shared pod. "I'm glad we share more than just a sleeping pod." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "So am I?" In that moment, the station's noise faded. Adrian and Sarah stood side by side, two officers bound by circumstance and trust. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but together they felt stronger. As the hours passed, they helped with routine checks, shared food rations in the mess hall, and spoke of places beyond the stars. Every step they took on Aria 9 felt less alone. And when the next resting period came, they returned to Pod 47. Inside the small space, they sat closer than before, the bond between them deeper. Outside, the station drifted on, ever in need of those willing to work side by side, skin to skin when needed, and always heart to heart. Adrian and Sarah moved through the maintenance corridor when the station shuddered again. A dull thud echoed through the metal walls. Dust fell from overhead pipes. Sarah pressed her hand against the bulkhead, listening. Adrian checked his wrist console. "Micrometeorite impact near Sector 5, he said. "We should inspect the hull." They reached an observation window overlooking the storage deck. Tiny fragments of rock and ice drifted past the thick glass. A small crack spidered outward from one of the outer panels. Sarah frowned. "If that crack spreads, we could lose pressure in this wing," Adrian nodded. "We need to seal it before more debris hits." They found the nearest pressure hatch and pulled on their maintenance suits. Thick gloves and reinforced visors made movement slow. Adrian handed Sarah a patching kit with adhesive sealant and reinforcing plates. Together they stepped into the airlock. The outer hatch cycled open with a hiss. The void beyond glowed with distant stars. The station's hull curved away, marked with scuffs and burn marks. Outside, tiny meteorites still struck the surface in dull taps. Each impact sent a small shudder through their bodies. Adrian held the tether line while Sarah knelt beside the cracked panel. She applied sealant with careful strokes. Adrian pressed the metal plate over the crack, securing it with clamps. Sparks from the station's external lights danced on the visor. A sudden gust of debris swirled around them, thrown off by another strike. Adrian shielded Sarah with his body. She looked up, eyes wide, then smiled beneath her visor. "Good reflex," she said. They worked in silence for a few moments until the seal held. Sarah tapped her helmet mic. "Pressure stable. Patch successful." Adrian released a breath he didn't know he held. "Well done," he replied. They replaced tools in the tethered pouch and made their way back to the airlock. The inner hatch sealed behind them. Sarah removed her helmet and shook out her hair. Adrian did the same. The corridor felt warmer and safer. "That was risky," Adrian said, "but you handled it well." Sarah smiled softly. "You keep a steady hand, that helped." They walked toward the station's engineering bay to report their work. Along the way, engineers gave nods of thanks. Life support technicians checked their consoles. The station's pulse quickened with each repair. Adrian and Sarah felt pride in their part. In the mess hall later, they found 2 trays of warm soup. The air tasted of spices and heat. Sarah carried one tray to a corner table. Adrian followed, carrying the other. They sat side by side. "You? We're brave out there," Sarah said, stirring her soup. "Most people would have waited for a drone." Adrian sipped his soup. "I prefer hands-on work." They talked about fear and duty. Sarah spoke of how danger sharpened her mind, how she felt alive when facing the void. Adrian admitted he had always kept danger at a distance until now. Sharing that moment with Sarah had changed his view. As they ate, the station lights dimmed for night cycle. Soft hum replaced the daytime bustle. Adrian looked across the table. "Thank you for trusting me out there," Sarah nodded. "We trust each other now." Outside the mess hall window, a shuttle docked. Its lights reflected on the station's hull Adrian and Sarah watched the small vessel settle. It brought supplies and new crew. Tomorrow they would work together again. For now, they had a moment of calm. Later, they returned to Pod 47. The sleeping mats were cool against their skin. Adrian lay back and closed his eyes. Sarah stretched beside him and curled toward him. The pod's soft blue light pulsed gently. "We make a good team," Sarah whispered. Adrian turned his head so. Their shoulders touched. "Yes," he replied. "We do." In the quiet of the sleeping pod, they felt safer than anywhere else in the galaxy. The station might shake and crack, but together they held it steady. And as they drifted to sleep, the bond between them grew stronger than any storm in space. Adrian woke to the gentle hum of the station's main generators. The night cycle had ended and soft white lights filled the corridor. He and Sarah stepped out of the pod and stretched. Today, a diplomatic shuttle would arrive with envoy Kalen Miles from the Council on Earth. Area 9 was not a common meeting place, but its location made it a neutral ground. They reached the docking bay as the shuttle's docking clamps engaged with a hiss. Sarah consulted her wrist console. "Communication systems say the shuttle's COM relay is unstable," she noted. Adrian nodded. "I'll guide the envoy through the corridor by foot. You handle the link to Central." Together they moved. Toward the airlock dock in the shuttle's entry corridor, Envoy Miles waited, flanked by 2 security officers. He wore a simple suit and looked tired. His communicator was silent. Adrian offered a steady smile. "I'm Captain Adrian Cole, and this is Lieutenant Sarah Evans. Welcome to Area 9? The envoy inclined his head. As they walked, the corridor lights flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. Sarah tapped her console. "The relay is failing. We need to repair the COM node in Sector 2. Adrian glanced at the narrow hall. Crates of spare parts blocked part of their path. He lifted one crate while the envoy stepped aside. Together, Adrian and Sarah cleared the way. The envoy followed, quiet. They reached the COM node, its panel open and wires exposed. Sarah knelt and traced the damaged relay cable. Adrian held the portable terminal as she worked. Sparks flew when she reconnected the main line. The console beeped. "Link restored," Sarah announced. The envoy's communicator lit up. He spoke into it and nodded. "Central thanks me." They confirmed safe passage for the council ship. He turned to Adrian. "You both did well under pressure." They escorted him down a maintenance shaft to the station's primary meeting room. The walls were bare metal, and a single viewport showed the stars. Engineers set up a simple table and chairs. Envoy Miles took his seat. Adrian and Sarah remained standing. A warning klaxon sounded. Red lights flashed. Adrian grabbed Sarah's arm. "Power surge in the reactor core." The envoy rose in alarm. Sarah tapped her console. "We can't let the core overheat. Come with us." The envoy followed as they sprinted through the service. Tunnels. They reached the reactor control hatch. Engineers shouted instructions. The core's coolant flow had dropped. Sarah spoke into her mic. "Divert excess coolant from the auxiliary tank." Adrian opened the safety latch and rerouted a thick hose under Sarah's guidance. Coolant hissed as it surged into the system. The reactor shuddered, then the klaxon stopped. Lights returned to normal. Envoy Miles exhaled. "I have never seen such quick action," he said. Adrian smiled and wiped sweat from his brow. Sarah tapped her console to confirm stable core temperature. After the emergency, they returned to the meeting room. Envoy Miles thanked them again and took a tablet to discuss treaty terms. Adrian and Sarah stood near the viewport watching the Earth's council ship appear beyond the station's hull. As the talks continued, Sarah leaned close to Adrian. "We make a strong pair," she whispered. Adrian nodded. "Yes. Together we keep this station running and save lives too." Hours later, the meeting ended. Envoy Miles shook their hands. Before boarding his shuttle, he said, "Area 9 owes you both a debt. I will recommend you for commendations." Adrian and Sarah exchanged proud smiles. When the diplomatic shuttle departed, they walked back together through the silent corridors. Their footsteps echoed softly. The station felt calmer now that the crisis had passed. Adrian reached down and held Sarah's hand. They stepped into Pod 47 and settled onto the mats. The pod's soft blue glow filled the small space. Sarah turned to Adrian. "We fit," she said with a gentle smile. Adrian took her hand and nodded. "We do." Outside Area 9, the void was still and vast. Inside, two allies found comfort in shared space and shared purpose. Their bond had grown through every challenge, and skin to skin they rested, ready for whatever came next. Adrian and Sarah woke to a quiet hum in the corridor. The pod's lights dimmed and then glowed steady. They stepped out, still near each other. The day's tasks waited. Both felt the weight of their partnership. Adrian offered Sarah a small smile. She nodded and returned it. Together they walked toward the station's main deck. The supply ship had arrived overnight. Crates now lined the cargo bay floor. Sarah checked her console and read the inventory list. Some medicines and food rations had come through. Adrian helped unload heavy containers. They moved side by side, each steadying the other. Station workers called out thanks as supplies passed. The rhythm of unloading felt like a dance. As they carried a crate of hydroponic seeds, Sarah paused. Adrian looked at her. She tapped his shoulder and smiled. "We'll have fresh greens in 2 weeks," she said. Adrian nodded. "That will lift everyone's spirits." He could see the hope in her eyes. Together they placed the crate in the greenhouse bay. The greenhouse bay was warm and bright. Lights simulated sunlight over rows of plants. Engineers monitored water and nutrient levels. Sarah and Adrian moved carefully between seedlings. Sarah planted a row of lettuce. Adrian arranged new pots for basil. They worked in silence, each absorbed by the task. Yet they felt a quiet joy in the shared work. Sarah spoke first. "I like this place," she said. "It shows life even in space," Adrian agreed. "It reminds me of Earth." He traced a leaf gently. Sarah watched him. "Maybe one day we can grow trees here," Adrian laughed softly. "That would be something." Their words hung between them, tender and hopeful. After the greenhouse, they went to the communications hub. Sarah sat at the central console. Adrian stood behind her and watched data scroll. Distant ships sent routine messages. Sarah sorted them and flagged urgent requests. Adrian offered coffee from his canteen. She took a sip and thanked him. The warmth spread through her, and she placed her hand on his arm. A message flashed on the screen. An unknown distress call from a nearby outpost. The outpost reported medical emergencies. Sarah frowned. "They need help," she said. Adrian leaned forward. "We should send a shuttle." Sarah tapped commands. "I'll notify Central." She turned to Adrian. "Will you lead the rescue team?" Adrian nodded. "Of course." They gathered a small crew of engineers and medics. Adrian briefed them in the hangar bay. He spoke clearly and with calm authority. Sarah monitored the shuttle systems and comlink. The shuttle engines roared as it lifted off. Adrian watched it go, feeling the weight of responsibility. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Be safe," she whispered. The shuttle returned hours later. The crew had treated wounded colonists and repaired life support. Sarah ran to meet Adrian as he stepped off. He looked tired but relieved. "We saved them," he said. Sarah hugged him, careful not to crush his uniform. Adrian held her close, and for a moment time stood still. They walked back to Pod 47. Under soft lights. The station felt quieter after the day's events. Sarah yawned and offered to start the pod cycle. Adrian nodded. Inside the pod, the mats felt soft. They lay side by side and shared the single life support. Adrian turned his head toward Sarah. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. Outside Area 9, stars sailed silently. Inside the pod, two hearts beat in quiet unity. Day 5 had tested them in new ways. Yet they had grown closer through each task. As they drifted to sleep, their hands found each other. And in the small space they shared, Adrian and Sarah found hope for tomorrow. Adrian awoke to a soft vibration in the corridor. The station's internal sensors flagged a radiation leak in the cargo transfer bay. He and Sarah stepped out of Pod 47, alert and ready. Sarah checked her wrist console. "The dose rate is rising fast," she said. "We need protective gear to seal the breach." They hurried to the safety locker and pulled on heavy radiation suits. The bulky suits hissed as they sealed. Adrian tested his visor and heard Sarah's voice come through clearly. The suits made movement slow, but each found rhythm in the other's steps. They moved down the corridor as red warning lights blinked at the cargo transfer bay, a transporter. Beam flickered. One of the containers had suffered damage during unloading, and its contents were unstable. Engineers stood back behind a safety line. The bay's airlock seal had weakened, letting radiation escape. Adrian tapped his suit helmet. "Let me reroute the power to the containment field," he said. Sarah nodded and knelt by the control panel. The container sat on a graded platform beneath the transporter. Geiger counters clicked rapidly. Sarah accessed the panel and displayed the field generator circuit. Wires were scorched and sparking. Adrian found a storage rack with spare fuses and tools. He passed them through the safety hatch to Sarah. She replaced a blown fuse under his direction. Sparks flew, and the generator hummed back to life. The radiation alarm slowed. Adrian watched the readings drop. "Containment field is stabilizing," he announced through his comm. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. She keyed a release sequence and the safety line retracted. Engineers hurried forward to reinforce the seal around the container. They removed their helmets in the adjacent corridor. Stalwart faces of station workers met them. Adrian and Sarah shared relieved smiles. The suits were heavy and hot, but each knew the other's hand would guide them back if they faltered. "Good work," said the lead engineer. He nodded to both. Sarah blushed under her visor and waved him on. Adrian straightened his jacket and looked at Sarah. "We make a strong team. In any hazard," he said. Sarah returned his gaze. "Yes," she replied. "We balance each other." Later they reached the observation deck to rest. The viewport showed a meteor field drifting by. Adrian and Sarah sat on a bench. Sarah sipped hot tea from a thermal mug. Adrian handed her a small ration bar. They shared a quiet moment, bodies still warm from the protective suits. Sarah spoke first. "I never thought I'd feel safe in a radiation suit." Adrian smiled. "It's not the suit that keeps us safe. It's knowing someone watches your back." Sarah looked at him, her eyes soft. "You watch mine." Their moment was broken by a call from Central. A distress beacon blinked on the station map. The Kabir outpost, 10 light minutes away, reported an outbreak of an alien pathogen among their crew. Shuttles could carry infected samples back here only under strict quarantine. Sarah tapped her console. "This station has limited isolation chambers," Adrian frowned. "But we can adapt the medical bay." They found Dr. Monroe waiting. She wore a white coat and concern on her face. "We need to set up isolation wards and study the samples," she said. "We can't risk contamination," Adrian nodded. "Guide us." "We'll prep the bay." In the medical bay, they cleared space by moving beds and equipment. Sarah disinfected workstations while Adrian set up sterilization barriers. They connected. Sealed containers to ventilation filters. Each corner of the room became a safe cell. The bay's lights glowed bright and clinical. Dr. Monroe prepared a sample container. Sarah held it carefully. Adrian adjusted the containment lock. The door hissed shut. The bay's sensors began monitoring air quality. The sample remained secure. Monroe thanked them both. "You've turned this bay around in minutes," Adrian shrugged. "We had good help." He looked at Sarah, who was organizing medical data on a tablet. She glanced up and met his eyes. No words were needed. Each knew the other's skill made the work possible. In the quiet that followed, Adrian and Sarah stood side by side. The station's hum and the bay's soft alarms formed a background to their thoughts. Sarah smiled. "We save lives from radiation and illness." Adrian offered his arm. "And we will save more." As their shift ended, Adrian escorted Sarah back to the pod.